Hey everybody, I'm Marc Ross. I'm here with my buddy Gerald Ashley. It's Ructions, December 8th, Friday. Holiday season is ramping up. It's a Hanukkah. Got Christmas around the corner. It's all happening. Gerald Ashley, how are you? What's the word?
I'm well. It's December. It's a little bit cold, but nothing dramatic. But as we
Here it
can't
is,
go,
our weather report. The weather report. It's cold in December. That's good.
yeah, well, we normally have to be much more dramatic these days and report that we're within inches of dying. Talking of which, I thought I'd start with a little quiz question for you, which we
Oh
won't
no.
know, well, we won't know the answer until afterwards. I'll give you what happened last time, and we have to predict what's going to happen next. At COP
Okay.
at COP27, there were 315 private jets, and there were around 50,000 delegates. At COP28, there are 100,000 delegates. What the hell are they all doing? And so, any predictions on how many private jets? And then we'll let people know in a few weeks' time.
You want my prediction now?
Hmm.
What was it? You said there was 215 last time.
No, 315.
315. I'm gonna say 775.
Oh, what? Do you think it will have gone down?
No, I think it's gone up. 775.
Oh, I see. 775. Good Lord. No, I don't think it'll be as many as that. But it is reassuring that all these people are flying to a nice hot country to enjoy themselves, and quite a few of them are managing to do it on a private jet, with the entire message that people like you and I should sit at home in the cold. But I just thought I'd make that point.
I did see, Prime Minister Sunak was questioned by a reporter suggesting he spent more time on UK1, whatever the private jet is for the Prime Minister, than he spent more time in a private jet traveling back and forth than actually on the ground at the conference.
Well, there you go. And these 100,000 people, none of whom seem to have Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Quite extraordinary.
There's some other, there's also a huge number around the number of like official lobbyists. It's like a staggering number, thousands, possibly, I don't know. If there's
It's
100,000
turning,
delegates, like there's a huge number of lobbyists over there as well.
yeah, I think it's turning into an oil industry gig, because the largest number of people of any industry sector out there is from actually the people who are keeping us alive and going all the time, the oil industry and the gas industry. And get this, if it wasn't absolutely comic that it was held in the United Arab Emirates this year, there's a lot of talk that next year it's going to be in Baku, which is one of the greatest Eastern European oil producers you can imagine, though it may be a little bit too close to Mr. Putin's backyard. But I'm afraid I think all this COP stuff is going the same way as the World Economic Forum. Obviously, people should talk. Obviously, there are big issues and there are things that it makes sense for there to be some form of harmonization on. But the idea that you just get these epic amounts of people into a place for 2 weeks, or it's not even that, is it? I think it's probably more like a week, and it's going to solve anything. The answer is no, complete waste of time.
But that being said, if Ructions was invited, if we were invited to broadcast from Baku or any other
Yeah,
glorious,
that's because we're
we would say yes, correct?
we're happy to go anywhere, basically,
We
within
would
reason.
say yes. We would
Within
say
reason.
yes.
Well, I understand about Baku. It's that part of the world has ferocious wind. It can be quite exposed in terms of weather there, so it may not be the sunny uplands that everybody's hoping for.
Yeah, I guess we should probably hope for Cannes as opposed to Baku. All right. Speaking of glorious places, Iowa. The Iowa caucuses are 38 days away, January 15th, 2024. There's 99 counties in Iowa, Gerald. I've been to 96 of them. It's a really amazing state. Amazing pork chop, great corn. Not a lot of people, but they have a huge outsized role
Are
in
you going to
our
give
political
me?
process.
Are you going to give me a statistic that there are more pigs than people in Iowa, or something
I
like that?
can't confirm that, but my guess is that's probably the case. There's certainly more corn and
Right.
soybean than humans.
Yeah.
But it's a great state. It's a lot of fun. If you ever get a chance to go, some great Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. So there's things to do there. Anyways, January 15th, 2024, and all signs point to Trump being the nominee. Again, this is a bit of a performative exercise, but Ron DeSantis is making a huge push in the state. His recent poll numbers haven't been moving. All the buzz around his campaign is that it's going in the wrong direction, but we'll see. I don't know. If anything's going to happen exciting, it's going to happen in the next 38 days.
And of course, Iowa would be a classic Democrat state in the general election. Is that fair?
It's shifting. It's gone much more. It had been a bit of a battleground state, but it's gone decidedly red for the last few years. So, in fact, the Democrats aren't even holding a caucus there. They've shifted their caucus season completely.
Oh, really?
Which is interesting. Yeah, for a number of factors. I was not very representative of the nation demographically, and the Democrats are more progressive, more in tune with what's going on. So they've shifted their calendar entirely. But this is the thing about these caucuses, it's a private exercise, right? It's not, it's sanctioned by the state, but it's held by a private political party as they select delegates for the convention. But the big thing about this is give something the media talk about. It's the first time people are actually voting for something that counts. So it can be used as a launching pad, as it was for Jimmy Carter in 1976. That's when Iowa really became popular, because here was this Southern peanut farmer governor who won an election, and that really got the momentum going. So the next big contest after that is a primary in New Hampshire. Caucuses, interesting event. They only happen for 2 hours. They happen at night. It's basically people getting together and physically moving to different parts of a room who they're siding for. So you actually get up. It's not a private vote. You get up in front of your neighbors and you literally caucus and gather for who you select, and the result comes in. Whereas the primary is like an all-day voting experience.
And a very different demographic, I would have thought, from Iowa.
Typically, caucuses are the most hardened, like political activists in both parties. Because it's so concentrated, and it's such a weird process, and you got to be a bit of a nerd to actually do it. Whereas a primary is like a traditional vote. You go into a ballot booth, you vote, and you're done. And it's over 7 or 8 hours. The caucus is at night, and it really involves like paper, pencil. It's quite an interesting thing. But what a caucus is really important about is getting your people there, because it's at a specific time. So it really shows organization. So for DeSantis to do well, he's going to have a tremendous ground game, really good field team, actually physically getting people into a car, getting them to the right church, getting them to the right, UFW Foreign Affairs, UFW Veterans Hall, Gymnasium, etc., to vote. So we'll see. But all signs point to Trump.
It's all about local organization, and in that sense.
Correct. Yeah, but it'll get a lot of attention because the news has nothing else to talk about. So, and if somehow DeSantis does well, even in fact if he becomes a close second, he can use that as a victory to propel him forward. So we'll see what happens.
And then the circus starts and runs through pretty much to the summer, basically.
Yeah, but it should be. I would imagine that the delegate votes will probably be done like early March. They have this thing called Super Tuesday where, 10 or 15 state votes, and it should be done pretty quickly. And the Democrats have also condensed their schedule, so you can get into the general faster, blah, blah, blah. So we'll see. It's the weirdest election I've ever witnessed, in the sense there's so little movement, and there's like just people, especially on the Republican side, scrapping to come anywhere near Trump. Trump, go ahead.
I saw a quote, which may be a misquote, that Biden had said he's only really standing again because Trump's standing. Yeah. Well, standing is an interesting word to be using here, because both of them seem to be just about clinging on, I would have thought. But
look at you, good wordsmithing. No, I thought that was obviously I didn't think that was a mistake. I think he was like telling the world, like, I'm only doing this out of civic duty. I'm the only guy who can stop Trump. But Biden's poll numbers are absolutely atrocious, horrible. There's no indication they're going to turn around anytime soon.
The big winner would be neither of the above, wouldn't it? I mean, the large number of people don't really want either candidate, from what I can see.
100%, yeah. There's just absolutely no interest in this election, and it's a shame because it's a critical time, as we've been talking about the last few weeks, what's going on in the world, the economy, etc. And we have a bit of our democracy is a bit flaccid here in the States right now, and it's hard to believe that these are going to be our two candidates to choose from. But we'll see. I mean, who knows? It's possible something crazy could happen in 2024. So I think there's a small possibility of that happening, but all signs point to Biden and Trump as of today being the two candidates. And frankly, I don't even see them campaigning. Like, everybody knows who they are. They're not going to debate each other. Trump's going to be crazy. Biden's going to be old and say, this guy's crazy. I'm old, but he's really crazy. Keep me in office. That's the campaign.
Yeah, so we could just go and watch films and do other stuff rather than worry about any of this.
I think I want to pivot to the UK, because I don't know if you saw this, but the Tory party, obviously there's a famous conference season, which I think is September, October in your political calendar, and usually 3-4 day gatherings. I read that the Tory party is thinking about doing a one-day conference, which probably makes sense. I mean, politics is now a 24/7 occupation. It's gets tons of print. It's on TV. And also, like, a reflection of like what's happening here in the States. These political parties to me are just losing their usefulness, especially here in the States. I don't know if you see that in the UK, but
yeah, I mean, I think
going through a transition here.
We do kind of have a slightly different system that people over here kind of forget about how our system works. Obviously, there are parties, and but they are parties of individual MPs that have come together. Of course, it's got inverted over the years, in that you become a party member and then hope to be an MP rather than the other way around. But we've got a situation which I think we've kind of flagged about for nearly a year now, that the Conservative Party are in serious trouble here. I mean, very serious trouble. I mean, there's a sort of tipping point in first past the post voting, that if you slip much below 25-26%, you suddenly collapse in the number of seats you're likely to win. What keeps the two main parties going is that the opposition in the past has always, other than the two main parties, has always been a mile wide but only an inch deep. So, some people have tried to have national campaigns of sorts, but they always really don't go anywhere, even the Liberal Democrats, because they're not concentrated enough around sufficient seats. The joker in the pack is the Reform Party, which used to be the so-called Brexit Party. And they may peel off a fair amount of the so-called right wing of the Tory party. The sort of prince across the water, if you enjoy these things, is that Nigel Farage, I don't know if he's still in this crazy TV program, would he get involved in the next election? I would make a prediction and say no, but I think we're getting to a stage where, shouldn't dramatize it, but the Tory party is not far from meltdown. And which,
I don't mean to laugh, but I mean, how much? Like, if that's not dramatic, what would be a more dramatic state?
well,
just complete implosion.
Well, let's calibrate it slightly and say, where are we just before you melt down? That's probably where they are. But students of long-term political history will point to the Tory party having split famously before in the 1840s, 1850s, and were out of power for an extremely long period of time. Is that going to happen now? I've no idea. On the current state of play, it's a shoe-in for the Labour Party. But again, there seems to be a large body of people who don't actually want either party to win.
Yeah.
And I sometimes wonder if the Labour Party want to win, because it's quite fun being the opposition and tearing into the government. But if you have to sort out energy policy, immigration, which is a huge one here at the moment, inflation, and a whole shopping list of things that need attention, who actually wants that job? But at the moment, it looks like Keir Starmer's got it for taking, basically.
I think what's interesting is I always remind people about campaigns is that they're binary, right? It's yes or no. It's not, it's, are you voting for Trump or Biden? That's the choice. And most elections are really about the protest votes, not really a vote of support. I think the last vote where people were like really excited was 2008 when Obama first got elected. That was a very special election, and I mean everything Obama did that year and his team was magical, and they just had so much money and organization and enthusiasm, and I mean just one for the ages. I don't know the last time there's been an election like that in the UK. Maybe Tony Blair had the similar. I don't know, but there was. The last recent elections have been more like a protest vote. Like,
yeah, I think you could say that the background is very similar to pre-Blair, where under the major government they were kind of unraveling before their eyes. And again, as we've talked before, politicians find comfort in either foreign visits or dealing with pointless minutiae. So under Major, we had the famous phone line where you could ring in and complain about bollards on motorways, the so-called cone hotline, which was beyond ridiculous. And now Mr. Sunak has come up with some convoluted nonsense about how old you can be if you can smoke or not. I mean, the whole thing is just, complete madness. Whilst there are 20 or 30 big topics that are not being addressed, and I don't think will be addressed by the other party either, to be honest. And therein lies the real problem, because how long can this go on before something has to be done about some of these issues?
Yeah, I'm in the same way. And it feels like external events are going to force that, and maybe a leader is going to step up. But I don't know. The state of democracy in the West is sluggish, but maybe that's how it's always been. And we just have these rare inflection points where we have great people. But it does just seem on both sides of the Atlantic, there's such lack of enthusiasm, lack of leadership, lack of interest, lack of vigor and vitality, which you need. And, if you're a shark, you have to keep moving. And democracy seems to have gone unshark-like.
I think it's been damaged. You could say in the UK, back to the age of Blair, where policies were driven by focus groups.
Right.
You could not have prosecuted the Second World War by addressing a focus group. Should we invade Italy or not? I mean, it's a completely wrong way to even think about these issues. Focus groups are fine for things like parking regulations, speed limits, all this sort of stuff. It's small town stuff. But big government needs leadership and a clear idea of what it wants to do. I mean, I have absolutely no idea what Rishi Sunak stands for, but equally, I have no idea what Keir Starmer stands for, other than that they both, quote, want the job, unquote.
They both want to invite you to Checkers for a long weekend. That's what they want to do. So be ready for that. Speaking of getting a fancy invite, King Charles, your sovereign, been out and about. He's probably one of the more active, quote, king politician sovereigns we've seen.
Well, name a hereditary head of state that is, probably as visible as him. Obviously, he's in a slightly unfair way of putting it. He's following on from an amazing act, if you like, with Queen Elizabeth II. But he is somewhat different from her. The thing about Queen Elizabeth II was that she essentially stood above politics. She was very careful never to really share any opinion on anything other than horses and small dogs. I mean, that was about it. She didn't even really make much comments about different parts of the country. She sometimes focused quite a lot on the Commonwealth, but in a very sort of generalistic sort of, we should all stay together. Now,
do you think that's because of her age, or the way she grew up, or the way she got the job?
I think it's kind of may have been all of the above, and personality-wise as well. Now, King Charles is a different person. He's always been, in a modest sort of way, quite an activist for things. And some people may say, well, that's been very good. So he's been very hot on the state of nature and the environment, and whether or not we can, live within our means, not financially, but from a point of view of living on the planet. Now, I sense that in recent years he has tended to up the ante on that. He's become more activist. And it's starting to show through slightly now, in a small way, in his reign. He got roped in very early on, and I think was badly advised, to something called the Windsor Agreement, which was the sort of bodged up back of a fag packet agreement between the EU and Britain over trade in Northern Ireland, and I think it's true to say it hasn't really delivered, and it hasn't really suited either side particularly.
Right.
And he ended up greeting European politicians at Windsor Castle and all the rest of it, and I just wonder if he needed to do that, but he was probably kind of told to do it to an extent. On the environment stuff, of course, he was a keynote speaker at what we've just been talking about at COP28. One couldn't have imagined Queen Elizabeth going anywhere near that. She might have been quite interested in the Kentucky Derby and a couple of things like that, but she shouldn't. I doubt if she would say many public words at an event even like that. So he's in a much more politically charged arena if he starts giving opinion talks in that area. And is that a problem? No, it's not. But you're not in itself, maybe, but it's slightly changing his role, and I think he's going to be careful of that, because if you like, he shouldn't lower himself into politics.
Well, maybe he doesn't see himself, quote unquote, lowering himself into politics, but he sees himself as, adding vitality and vigor, as we talked about. I don't know. Maybe he sees a vacuum that nobody's there.
I think also frustration. I think he has quite a long history of complaining that, quote, something must be done about a variety of issues. I mean, he had a very long and brutal campaign against British modern architecture for a period of time. He particularly upset the architectural profession because he didn't like a lot of designs of new buildings in London, which is fair enough. I mean, that's a personal opinion, I suppose. But he is, at the end of the day, a non-political head of state. And do we think he'll stray too far? No, probably not. But he is, just to point out, he is quite different from his mother, quite different.
But it is amazing still, the monarchy, the amount of media attention he gets, as the Queen got. If he came to New York, it would be front page news, it would dominate the headlines. I mean, just the amount of ink and media attention that house, that role plays in our world is really, it's amazing. And it doesn't seem to have lost any momentum switching from Queen Elizabeth to King Charles, from what I've seen.
No, I think that's probably true. I think it's also true to say in British history, the monarchy has been in and out of fashion. There was a large anti-Queen Victoria movement when she was on the throne. There was quite a percentage of the population thought that, well, she doesn't do anything all day except going around dressed as a widow for 30 years. And what's the point? And then, there've been so there's swings and roundabouts with things. Plus, of course, there's a certain amount of soap opera with it.
There's a whole streaming network, aka Netflix, who's built basically the whole company around the crown, which is pretty amazing. All right, let's go to South America. Who out there in 2024 had South America as one of the more interesting geopolitical spaces? We have Argentina, a new leader, and then Guyana, Venezuela. Is war coming to South America? Is a new currency coming? I mean, let's start with Argentina. I forget the stat now, but essentially early 1800s, maybe it was even it had to be the 1800s, 19th century. Argentina had a bigger economy than the United States. What happened?
Yes, this is one of these sort of quiz questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the year that's normally given is 1910 or something.
Yeah.
But it was it was big in the United States, and apparently there used to be a phrase to talk about somebody as being as rich as an Argentinian,
Yeah.
and
And
they were extremely wealthy people.
I haven't been, but I've heard Buenos Aires is spectacular. Like it's literally one of the most gorgeous cities in the world. It's almost like an empire in waiting.
Almost number one on my bucket list of places to go to. Actually, I very much like to go, and hope to do so. Obviously, it was the military under General Perón and everything screwed everything up, and also an extremely long period of time ago. We're talking about I think Perón took over in something like 1944, 1945, and it basically went to a form of crony capitalism, and it went massively downhill till we ended up with ruled by various number of generals. And then since then, Argentina's been in a cycle of people who turn up and say, right, enough is enough, I'm going to clean everything up. And they have tended to be even bigger crooks than the people before. And, they've had quite a run of incredibly crooked politicians, and the whole body politic is been in a bad way. Ladies and gentlemen, who's eccentric to say the least, and has maybe built on his eccentricities as a campaigning tool, and has won, sounds as if he might be an incredibly radical, dramatic change maker. But as I think you and I noted before we started this call, he's actually making fairly tentative steps. And I think that is a big plus, to be honest.
Let me give you, before, because I want to talk to you about the currency stuff, but this is a headline from the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago. El Loco won the Argentinian election last month with outlandish ideas. Now he's backpedaling. So, as we've talked about 100 times, these guys on the campaign trail say one thing, they get behind the desk, they're actually presented with the real data, the real books, the real, here's what's really happening. And they're like, wow.
Yeah. And I mean, it's very different when you're sort of singing to your own supporters exactly what they want to hear from, as you say, you've now actually, you're no longer at the bar or down a pub. You've actually got to get on and do it.
What is your famous saying? Saloon ideas, or Sunday pub ideas, or what was?
And Sunday pub ideas. There's nothing that cannot be solved after 3 beers on a Sunday lunch. Even if you don't solve it, you will think that having had 3 beers that you probably have. So it's an ideal scenario. But seriously, the thing about Argentina is that they have had a series of calamitous economic management systems that in the end have always ended up with economic devaluation of the currency, changed the currency a number of times. And my fear about the new regime is that they've made a big thing of so-called dollarization.
So, and why would that be, in layman's terms, 101? Why would that be bad?
Well, because I think it will be far too tight a constraint on suddenly making everything better. If you were to take a non-economic model, it is literally like taking an incredibly serious drug addict or near a death alcoholic and saying, right, not a single drop now.
Yeah.
And you might kill the patient. So is there a more moderate way of doing it? Well, funnily enough, the moderate way of doing it, which would be a little bit like Thatcherism and Reaganomics, would be to say, don't concentrate on this top down, we will do this. Just make the conditions for a free economy better. Get rid of all the corruption and cronies, and things will steadily get better of their own accord. And maybe he will be wise enough to do that. But I think if he goes for this big bang of, right, from tomorrow, we're fixing to the dollar, I think it would unravel quite quickly. And then what does Argentina do? Because they will have failed yet again, and they're still stuck on the same cycle.
It would also seem to me, I'm no currency expert, but just watching what China's done with their currency, it does seem that if you give up control of your currency, it really limits the power of the government, the domestic government, to control their own affairs or manipulate it. Is that like also like a practical concern? Like there'd be more power
Well,
in the Federal Reserve than there would be in Buenos Aires?
You can do it if you control the economy. So the Chinese government, for example, they've got this sort of semi-secretive peg to the US dollar,
Right.
but they control everything that moves in China.
Right.
You've got a command economy there, and you've got a political framework that does not hesitate to almost take people out and shoot them. Certainly, businessmen who have literally disappeared on occasions, as have government officials who haven't, towed the line. And as we noted, was it about a month ago, one of the main reformers suddenly had a heart attack. Well, people do have heart attacks, and it might be a coincidence, but it's a very controlled economy. Argentina, I think, could end up with the worst of both worlds, which is a chaotic economy and an incredibly rigid monetary policy. And that would, my personal view is it wouldn't work, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, definitely a one to watch. I mean, it's a super important economy. It's still staggering to me. It's a G8 economy or G20. Yeah, it's a G20 economy. It's one. I mean, it's staggering to me. It's not even an economy, but one to watch. I want to go north, Guyana. I looked this up in 2019. I was at a lunch briefing with the ambassador of Guyana. His name was Excellency Riyad David Insanely. I'm not sure if he still has a job, but in 2019, I went to this briefing. I knew nothing about Guyana. This is pre-oil discovery. He was touting this. I think there's only like 750,000 people, but this is like one of the largest oil discoveries on the planet in recent history. ExxonMobil is all about this. It's like staggering. I mean, we're talking like UAE and South America. This week, Venezuela decided to change the map. And what's interesting about this part of the world is there are indigenous people that don't recognize borders. They move back and forth between Brazil, Guyana, Venezuela. If you go further in, obviously it's very dense forest, etc. Small country, ExxonMobil, Venezuela, military training now by the U.S. And there's also a British connection. What is your instincts about this? Doesn't seem good. It doesn't seem good.
The first observation is that Venezuela is not exactly short of oil. In fact, they have the largest oil reserves in the world. People often think it's Saudi Arabia. No, it isn't. It's Venezuela. And of course, it's Mr. Maduro, isn't it, in Venezuela?
Correct.
He is just another one of these sort of chaos merchants that South America seems to throw up. He's another sort of despotic type who has no simple understanding of economics and has pretty much ruined the economy, which is astonishing given their natural wealth. I suspect, I don't follow Venezuelan politics, but I suspect he's having a rough time for some reason domestically. And so let's change the focus onto something else. And so it's a kind of easy one to do. He's done the old trick, which is slightly frightening, which is exactly what Mr. Hitler did, and indeed Mr. Putin did, which is to hold a plebiscite, a so-called vote, that people apparently are welcoming this with open arms. That is quite a dark signal. Britain, of course, does have a relationship in that it was once British Guyana. We do not have the capability to send more than about half a dozen people there, I think, frankly. I mean, we've got no defense capability to do anything in a war sense. I don't think anybody's talking about it wanting to be a war, but there does need to be a deterrent. And I think it's going to come down to Uncle Sam. And I think there's already been quite a lot of maneuvering, hasn't there, by the US military.
There's been quote unquote military training. I got to imagine there's some other cooperative stuff going on. I mean, there's been a great book. ExxonMobil is one of the most interesting countries. It literally is a country. I mean, it is like, I mean, it was interesting. We were tweeting this week about, the one to watch, and I was like, watch ExxonMobil, and sure enough, at COP, the CEO of ExxonMobil was talking about Guyana and what's going on in Venezuela. And this plays into Kuwait. I mean, there's no way the Monroe Doctrine. I mean, there's a lot of stuff at play here, but again, we got another friction point, another part of the world. One of these outlying countries putting pressure on the West, distracting. You got to think Russia's involved, encouragement. I mean, again, we got the Middle East, we got Africa, we have South America now. I mean, it's like something is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. How long before Mr. Putin, says that he welcomes and warmly supports Venezuela and, just stirring the pot a little bit. I don't think they'd have any serious ambitions of doing something in South America, unless the Wagner group suddenly pop up in that part of the world, and I think that may be would be a serious escalation. And from what you say and what any of us know about British Guyana, or now Guyana, which is very little, it's a tiny place, and I would probably be quite difficult to defend in any meaningful way. I don't know.
Well, the interior, like I remember the briefing. I mean, it's wild country. It's like unsettled. I mean, they're literally, I don't know the number of people, but they're like 100,000, 1 million people that are they're nomadic, and the brush is so deep and so wild. And then basically everybody lives in Georgetown, one city on the coast. And, it's in some ways it's more a Caribbean island. It's very close to Trinidad and Tobago, even though it's part of South America, the continental. But
there's a bigger theme here, though, isn't there, of people going around sort of poking the West with a stick a little bit and sort of daring to do things. So, Putin with Ukraine thing, as far as I can see, and we've been saying for months, is completely bogged down and stuck. And the risk must be now that it actually swings a little bit in the Russian favor. And, how do you feel if you live in the Baltic states? I mean, you must feel.
You can't be. And this is another thing. Macron, Sunak, Biden. It's on their daily agenda now. Guyana, and like how many Guyana experts are there in the world?
Well, we aren't either of them. The only thing I do remember about that part of the world is they have some quite rare stamps, postage stamps. So if you have some of those stamps, you could make a few bob. But at a more serious level, we don't. And of course, the electorate don't really care. The domestic electorates don't care about things like this. But nevertheless, governments do have to, take notice of all this stuff.
This is in some ways. I mean, this is like our neighborhood, the Monroe Doctrine, all this, Gulf of Mexico, etc. I don't know. Pretty wild stuff. Something to watch. I don't think it happened by accident. And Putin, where is he? What's he up to today? He was in the UAE.
Putin's Putin's going to hold an election in Russia, isn't he?
March 17th, which is St. Patrick's Day. So
So is there?
Maybe Guinness beer could do some kind of promotional tie-in.
I'm going to say, going to be green beer in Moscow, or you're going to have dye in the river Moskva, or whatever it's called.
That could be the most interesting election in the spring, is the Russian election.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got a funny feeling I know who might win on that one, but we'll see.
Maybe we'll save our listeners for a deep dive for later. We'll build some that's a teaser. See what we did there, Joe. We'll talk about that. We got to get a Russian election expert, do a deep dive on what are the key precincts, what are the key battleground provinces, where will the votes come from for Putin to win?
They'll come from everybody who's told to vote for him, basically. So it's quite straightforward. Quite straightforward.
All right. Speaking of straightforward, why don't we pivot to what we're reading and watching? Hopefully, something fun, entertaining, uplifting, as we again talk about chaos and uncertainty, but on your bookshelf, I assume there's no chaos. It's all certainty.
No, and I've got another one out, another cheerful volume for everybody. It's called Devil Take the Hindmost, A History of Financial Speculation. It's written by
Love
a
it.
distinguished author and journalist called Edward Chancellor, English guy. First interesting thing to say about this is written in 1999. And of course, so he's missed, not through any fault of his own, it's just when it was published, the dot-com crash, Enron, the global financial fiasco, not to mention the gyrations we've had ever since. You could say the real growth of the internet titans and all the rest of it, not to mention Bitcoin and everything. So it's all before that period. It goes back about 400 or 500 years. It's got some very good stuff on the South Sea bubble. It's got a lot of very good stuff on the boom and bust after the American Civil War. And it basically says it's the usual theme that fraud normally occurs when you have overinflated markets, there's false accounting, and there's loads of leverage. And you put those together and you get trouble. And one of my favorite pet phrases, and I shall use it again, is don't worry if you've missed a crash, because there'll be another one along soon. I mean, they do come quite in regular form. The really big ones are fairly, not that frequent, but there's normally something on the go at the time. So Devil Take Hindmost by Edward Chancellor, although it's now nearly 24, 25 years old, is a very good book, because everything you read in it, it'll just chime wherever you are at the moment. And as we're on the topic, I'm just going to make a very small advertising advertisement for my own book, which is called Financial Speculation.
Love it.
It's not actually about
capitalism.
It's not actually about the history of it. It's about the sort of mechanics of how markets work. And obviously, it is available in all good bookshops and Amazon and all the rest of it. So I recommend.
Is that your brain on the cover? Is that an actual rendering of the author's brain? Or
I couldn't possibly comment there. It would appear to be made out of gold, so make of that what you will. I had no say in the design of the cover, by the way, but there we are. So that's the book. I should just mention that the book you recommended last time, The Swerve on the Emergence of Renaissance. I got that. I'm actually enjoying that book, and it's a very good book indeed. And it's
good, right? Yeah.
It filled in a lot of gaps of history that I certainly didn't know anything about. Now whilst we're on history, come on to what I'm watching. When I went to see Ridley Scott's film Napoleon.
You went to an actual theater. You sat in the theater. You got the popcorn, the chips, the soda. You actually went. In a dark room.
I actually went and saw it on a proper size screen and all the rest of it. And
amazing.
For one reason, funnily enough, because obviously Ridley Scott comes from an advertising background and is noted for very sort of cinematographic, whatever the word is, representations, and basically very visually arresting sort of stuff. So I went and saw it on a big screen. To use an English phrase, it's a curate's egg. It's good in parts. I think there's a fundamental flaw in that it's just trying to do too much. I mean, we forget just how much went on between about 1795 and 1815, which is the Battle of Waterloo and the demise of Napoleon Bonaparte. But it's an extraordinary period of time. It's an extraordinary amount of events. He is an extraordinary individual and was involved with other extraordinary individuals. There are a few sort of bitchy bits that some of the history is slightly shaky, but overall the problem is it's curiously too long at 2 3/4 hours, but also too short, because you can't possibly get all these events shoehorned in a time. So it's a slightly odd film. Never mind, because Ridley Scott is coming out with a director's cut. I think it's going to come out in February, and it's over 4 hours long. And so I'm just hoping, in a way, the criticism, the first one may be overpromised and underdelivered, and now there'll be more delivery and it'll fill in some of the gaps. But it's not as good a film as it can or should be, I don't think, to be honest.
As I told you, man, you're wasting your career in London. You should be in Hollywood, having lunch meetings with actors and producers, giving notes. No, I'm going to see it in the theater. Yeah, I like Ridley Scott, Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah, I think it's good. Maybe, I don't know. This kind of overview is good to go into it. Enjoy it as a cinematic experience as opposed to a documentary or history lesson.
Yeah.
Film length is pretty wild. I mean, I imagine directors always want to go longer, especially guys like Ridley Scott, and I don't know. And there's something about the theater, watching it on the big screen, right? The whole experience, and that's the proper way, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to see it. I'll let you know. But your assessment, I'm sure, is spot on. So, and there's one thing I was fascinated about Napoleon is the whole, obviously, the War of 1812 was super interesting to me. The selling the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, France had a huge possession. We got it, and there was all this idea that Napoleon would come to New Orleans, and I don't know. I mean, and he's still, the amount of attention this guy still gets is pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's kind of up there with Julius Caesar and that sort of level of people. I mean, there's no doubt about
that. So I'm going to talk about a film called, I caught this on the small screen as I was flying across the Pacific. You Hurt My Feelings, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, America's Sweetheart. She was in Seinfeld, was on SNL. Classic New York City comedy drama, relationship, etc. Good old film if you're looking for something fun, relaxing about the pitfalls and joys of being in a relationship with another human being. But fun film, saw it on a small screen, back of the seat, but good stuff. I've selected 3 books that, as we're coming up to the holiday season, hopefully you have more time to read. These are some books that I've been kind of noodling on. This one's about the experience economy. These are books I just picked up randomly.
What was that first one, Mark?
Well, it's about the experience economy. I've just been thinking a lot about how, as we're going more digital, AI, etc. I just think experiences getting out in the real world is going to have a lot more value. Like you going to the theater.
Yeah.
I think it's an opportunity to revisit this and how important it is and just the psychology behind it. This book is about Zingerman's, which is this amazing deli, bakery, restaurant in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They also have a mail order catalog. It's almost like a Midwestern version of what's the port in Hudson? No, what's your famous? Where does the Queen go?
Oh, Fortnum and Mason.
Yeah, so it's the opposite of that. A little more like Midwest blue jeans, but all this amazing, great food, and just the guy studied Russian at Michigan, and now he's running one of the most successful restaurant, food places, and just his experience, his approach to business. And then the final book is Rick Ridgway, who's had an amazing trip. He's been all over the world. It's just a collection of his adventures. I mean, he's a full-on explorer, adventurous, and he's climbed some of the biggest mountains in the world. He's kayaked in South America. He's been crazy adventures in Africa, and just kind of fun escape book. And I don't know, it's fun that people are still out there doing fun.
So there's a theme. It's a theme here of get out and do things rather than sit behind your screen. Is that the kind of theme in a way?
It does seem. There's such a push. Yeah, I mean, don't you think? I mean, there's so much digital stuff going on that I don't know. There's something about getting out and about, being around other people, traveling. I don't know. Maybe it's because I hadn't left the country as we talked about in years. So flying to Singapore and just smelling, experiencing, being in another time zone, another part of the world. I don't know. It was refreshing and opening, and it's a good reminder it's fun to get out. And I'm sure just even going to the theater, doing stuff like that. It's easy to watch a film at home, but there's something about the communal aspect of getting out and watching a film.
Now we've probably got one more edition, which I think is just going to be a couple of days before Christmas. So are we going to gear up for predictions and
sure, yeah,
how 2024 is going to go?
Maybe we should, adjust what we think 5 things, and then we can revisit where it's going to go. But I don't know. It seems like 24.
Big year.
Could be a bit rocky though.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, all of the above, and there's some enforced changes through elections, and that's before the inevitable events that happen every year as well.
Yeah, I think there's 40 Democratic elections.
Yeah,
Actually, there's some staggering amount of elections in 24
yeah.
in big economies, important countries. So,
And if they're not big economies, in ones that are kind of front and center in geopolitics, like Russia, for example.
yeah.
Of course, that's going to be incredibly tight race as to who wins that.
Maybe I'll get business cards made up. Putin's campaign manager.
Yeah, I'd be very careful with that job. It's a bit like being his food taster, I would have thought, frankly. But there we are.
All right, everybody. Good chatting with you, Gerald. We'll see you in a fortnight, 2 weeks, right?
Exactly right. Just before Christmas.
I love it. All right, buddy. Ciao.
Take care. Bye-bye.